Could the Romans have had their own version of the internet? It sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, an ancient civilization with its own sprawling network of information, buzzing beneath the marble streets of Rome. But what if the idea isn't as far-fetched as it seems? Picture this: a world where messages fly across continents in days, where news and gossip spread like wildfire, and where the entire empire stays connected through an intricate web of roads, couriers, and coded signals. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar? Today, we take the internet for granted. Our lives revolve around instant communication, endless streams of data, and the ability to share ideas with the click of a button. But 2,000 years ago, the Romans built something that might just be the ancient blueprint for our modern digital age. Think about how the internet works. It's not just about the websites or the apps, it's about the infrastructure. The cables beneath the ocean, the satellites in space, the servers humming in distant data centers. Now rewind to the height of the Roman Empire. Their version of this infrastructure, a staggering network of roads stretching over 250,000 miles, relay stations with fresh horses every few miles, and a postal system so efficient it could deliver a message from Britain to Egypt in just weeks. That's faster than some modern shipping services, and here's the kicker: the Romans didn't just move goods and soldiers, they moved information. Decrees from the emperor, military orders, tax records, even private letters, all racing across this vast system like packets of data across a network. So, was it really an ancient internet? Well, not in the way we think of it today. There were no screens, no keyboards, no memes, though the Romans definitely had their share of gossip. But the core idea, the ability to connect people, to transmit knowledge, to bind an empire together through shared information, that's where the parallels get fascinating. Over the next few minutes, we'll dive into the hidden world of Roman communication, uncovering the ingenious systems they built, the surprising similarities to our digital age, and the tantalizing question: if they'd had just a little more technology, could they have built something even closer to the internet as we know it? Buckle up, because this journey through time might just change how you see both the ancient world and the one we live in today. To call anything an ancient internet, we first need to understand what makes our modern internet so revolutionary. At its core, the internet is about three things: speed, reach, and standardization. Information travels almost instantly, connects nearly every corner of the globe, and follows universal protocols so anyone can participate. Now let's apply that lens to ancient Rome. Their system wasn't digital, but it achieved something strikingly similar in spirit. Take their Cursus Publicus, the imperial courier service. Like data packets zipping through fiber optic cables, government dispatches raced along Rome's roads at breakneck speeds for the time. Fresh horses waited at relay stations every 5 to 12 miles, allowing messengers to cover up to 50 miles in a single day. That's comparable to how our emails hop between servers, just at the speed of hoofbeats instead of light. Then there's the question of access. While most Roman citizens couldn't send private messages through the Cursus Publicus, it was reserved for official use. They had other options. Wealthy families employed private couriers, merchants used sailing ships to carry letters between ports, and even ordinary citizens could pay tabularii, professional letter carriers, to deliver their scrolls. It wasn't as democratic as today's internet, but for an ancient society, the scale of participation was unprecedented. Think of it like early computer networks. At first, only universities and governments had access, but the groundwork was there for something bigger. What truly mirrors our internet, though, was Rome's obsession with standardization. Just as every website today follows HTML protocols, the empire enforced uniform systems everywhere, Latin as the official language, Roman law as the legal framework, even standardized weights and measures. This meant a tax record from Syria could be understood in Spain, and a military order from Germany could be executed in Egypt without translation errors. That level of compatibility is what allowed information to flow as freely as it did, binding the empire together just as the internet now connects continents. But here's where the comparison gets really interesting. The Romans didn't just move information, they processed it. Take their census, conducted every 5 years across the entire empire. Census data traveled to Rome, where clerks crunched numbers to allocate taxes, plan infrastructure, and even track population trends. Sound familiar? It's not so different from how today's algorithms analyze our online behavior to optimize ads or recommend videos. Both systems turned raw data into actionable intelligence, just with papyrus instead of pixels. So did the Romans have an internet, not by our definition, but they built the closest thing the ancient world ever saw, a sprawling, standardized, shockingly fast network that moved ideas as effortlessly as we move tweets or TikToks. The real question isn't whether they had our internet, but whether we've simply reinvented theirs with silicon and satellites. If the Roman information network was their version of the internet, then their roads were the fiber optic cables that made it all possible. Stretching over 250,000 miles at its peak, this wasn't just a collection of dirt paths, it was an engineering marvel so advanced that some routes are still in use today. Take the legendary Appian Way, begun in 312 BC. This wasn't merely a road, it was Rome's first information superhighway, a stone-paved artery connecting the capital to southern Italy with such precision that modern surveyors marvel at its straightness. Just like underground cables follow optimized routes between cities, Roman engineers plotted these roads with ruthless efficiency, cutting through hills and bridging rivers to create the shortest possible path. What made these roads so revolutionary wasn't just their construction, though the layered foundations of gravel, sand, and stone could last centuries, but how they transformed communication. Every major route had milestones marking distances to Rome, essentially serving as ancient IP addresses that told travelers exactly where they stood in the network. Government couriers could calculate delivery times down to the day, knowing exactly how fast their horse-drawn data packets could travel between relay stations. And much like modern internet infrastructure prioritizes certain traffic, the Cursus Publicus couriers carried imperial messages in special leather pouches that gave them right-of-way over all other travelers, an ancient version of bandwidth prioritization. The scale of connectivity these roads provided is staggering when you consider the technology available. While our data zips across oceans through submarine cables, the Romans achieved something similar by paving routes from the misty highlands of Scotland to the sun-baked markets of Damascus. A merchant in Roman London could send goods to Jerusalem with confidence they'd arrive, just as we trust emails to reach their destinations. Military dispatches from the Rhine frontier reached Rome faster than some medieval kings could communicate with their own castles. This wasn't just transportation, it was the physical manifestation of an empire thinking as one nervous system. Perhaps the most striking parallel lies in how both systems handled damage. When an underwater cable gets cut today, internet traffic automatically reroutes through alternative paths. The Romans built their roads with the same redundancy. If landslides blocked a mountain pass or enemies destroyed a bridge, messengers simply took one of the many alternate routes crisscrossing the empire. Engineers even designed sections with removable wooden planks that could be torn up to slow invaders, a primitive firewall protecting their network's integrity. What truly cements the comparison is how these roads transformed society. Just as the internet erased distance between New York and Tokyo, Roman roads made a Mediterranean-spanning empire manageable. Provincial governors could administer territories hundreds of miles away because fresh orders arrived within weeks. News from the frontiers reached Rome fast enough to matter. And ordinary citizens, at least those wealthy enough to travel, could move across the known world with directions as simple as follow the paved road. That sounds an awful lot like typing a web address today, doesn't it? the roads didn't just connect places, they created the first truly interconnected civilization. The Roman courier system was the beating heart of their information empire, a meticulously organized network that would make even modern logistics companies envious. At the center of it all was the Cursus Publicus, a state-run messaging service so efficient it could put some of today's delivery apps to shame. Imagine a world where imperial decrees, military orders, and tax records raced across continents with the reliability of an email, except instead of fiber optic cables, they had fresh horses waiting at relay stations every 5 to 12 miles. These way stations, called mutations, functioned like ancient data hubs where exhausted mounts were swapped for rested ones in minutes, allowing couriers to maintain blistering speeds of up to 50 miles a day. That's roughly the distance between modern-day Boston and Providence covered in a single dawn-to-dusk ride. What made this system truly revolutionary was its structure. Much like how modern internet protocols ensure data packets take the most efficient route, the Cursus Publicus operated on strict imperial guidelines. Official messengers carried special lead seals called diplomata, which acted like all access passes to fresh horses, food, and lodging along their route. Without one, you weren't getting past the station master. This hierarchy of access mirrors how today's networks prioritize bandwidth. Urgent government traffic always got the fast lane, while everyone else waited their turn. And just as internet routers direct data along uncongested paths, Roman station managers kept detailed logs of traffic flow, rerouting messengers if a road was blocked by floods or bandits. Speed wasn't the only modern parallel. The system's security measures would feel familiar to any cybersecurity expert. Imperial dispatches were often sealed with wax stamped by the emperor's ring, an ancient version of encryption. Tamper with that seal and the penalty was death. Some sensitive messages were even written in cipher, with codes known only to provincial governors and the emperor himself. This wasn't just mail delivery, it was a secure information pipeline designed to keep the empire's most critical data out of enemy hands. But here's where the comparison gets really fascinating. While the Cursus Publicus was reserved for official use, private citizens found workarounds, just like how people today bypass paywalls or regional restrictions. Wealthy families hired their own tabularii or private couriers who could piggyback on the imperial network by bribing station managers. Merchants perfected the art of hitchhiking messages aboard grain ships heading to major ports. Even soldiers on the frontier found ways to slip personal letters into official supply convoys. Sound familiar? It's not so different from using a VPN to access geo-blocked content. Proof that where there's a will to communicate, humans will always find a way. The true genius of the system lay in its scalability. As the empire expanded, so did the Cursus Publicus, with new routes spiderwebbing into conquered territories like network nodes coming online. By the 2nd century, a message from Hadrian's Wall could reach the deserts of Egypt in under a month, a feat that wouldn't be matched until the invention of the telegraph. And much like how today's internet backbone relies on undersea cables between continents, the Romans understood that their empire's survival depended on these thin threads of communication stretching across mountains, rivers, and seas. Break one link, and an entire province might slip into rebellion before Rome even knew there was trouble. Perhaps the most striking difference between then and now isn't the technology, but the physicality of it all. Where our data travels as invisible electrons, Roman messengers were flesh and blood men enduring brutal conditions, racing through snowstorms, bandit attacks, and searing heat to keep the empire's pulse thundering. The next time your video buffers for a second, spare a thought for those imperial couriers, their horses lathered in foam, pushing the limits of ancient speed to deliver what we now summon with a tap. That relentless drive to connect, to bridge distances, to conquer time itself, that's the real thread linking Rome's couriers to our cloud servers. The Roman military didn't just rely on couriers and roads, they had their own version of instant messaging, a system so fast it could flash urgent warnings across hundreds of miles in minutes. High atop lonely hilltops and rugged cliffs, a chain of signal towers stretched like ancient cell towers, ready to relay messages at the speed of fire. These weren't simple bonfires, they were precision instruments of war, part of an elaborate network that turned flickering flames and columns of smoke into a language whole legions could understand. Picture a sentry in Britannia spotting an invasion fleet on the horizon. Within hours, that sighting could reach Rome itself, not by horse or ship, but by a cascading series of light signals leaping from tower to tower faster than any creature could run. The genius of this system lay in its simplicity and scalability. Each tower stood within clear sight of the next, often no more than a mile apart, close enough that signals remained visible even in bad weather. At night, guards used fire beacons, their flames intensified by pitch-soaked bundles of wood to pierce the darkness. By day, they switched to smoke signals, creating thick plumes by tossing damp hay onto the flames. But this wasn't just random flickering. The Romans developed standardized codes. A single flare might mean enemy sighted, while two quick bursts could signal cavalry approaching. Some historians believe they even used movable screens to create flashes in patterns, turning each tower into a kind of primitive telegraph. Strategic placement was everything. Towers didn't just follow the empire's borders, they protected key roads, overlooked mountain passes, and guarded river crossings. In hostile regions like Germania or Judea, they often doubled as small fortresses, garrisoned by a dozen soldiers who could both send warnings and hold their ground until reinforcements arrived. Along Hadrian's Wall in Britain, archaeologists have found evidence of signaling stations built directly into the wall itself, allowing messages to race from one end of the country to the other in under an hour. That's a communications feat unmatched until the 19th century. What made these towers truly revolutionary was their ability to broadcast information simultaneously to multiple locations, an ancient precursor to mass communication. When a frontier outpost signaled an invasion, every fort down the line saw the warning at once, giving commanders time to muster troops before the enemy even reached the first road. It's no accident that the Latin word for beacon, papyrus, gives us the modern pharos, meaning lighthouse, a fitting legacy for a system that guided the empire through its darkest hours. The parallels to modern networks are striking. Just as today's cell towers relay signals until they reach their destination, Roman beacon chains created a seamless web of light across the provinces. And much like how emergency alerts now blast to every phone in a danger zone, these signals could trigger instant reactions across vast territories. When the Jewish revolt erupted in 66 AD, historians like Josephus describe how flame signals from Jerusalem flashed all the way to Antioch, mobilizing legions before rebel forces could consolidate their gains. But this system had vulnerabilities. Fog or rain could obscure signals, and clever enemies soon learned to mimic them, sending false alarms to exhaust defenders or luring reinforcements into ambushes. The Romans countered with encrypted variations, changing signal patterns daily and stationing decoy towers to confuse attackers. In some frontier regions, they even deployed mounted couriers as backups, creating a hybrid system where speed and security reinforced each other. The haunting beauty of these towers is how they merged brute functionality with psychological power. For provincials living under Roman rule, the ever-present glow on the horizon was a constant reminder of the empire's reach, an unbroken chain of light binding the civilized world together. And for the soldiers who manned them, staring into the darkness night after night, those flickering signals were more than just tools. They were lifelines connecting isolated outposts to something greater. In that sense, maybe they weren't so different from us, staring at our screens, waiting for the next pulse of light to tell us we're not alone. If the Roman roads and signal towers formed the empire's information highway, then their writing materials were the hard drives where data lived. Papyrus scrolls and wax tablets might seem primitive compared to our terabyte servers, but they served the same essential function: preserving knowledge in a portable, retrievable format. Imagine a world without paper where every tax record, military order, or love letter had to be carefully inscribed on sheets made from the pith of Nile reeds, pressed thin and glued into long rolls. These scrolls were the Romans' equivalent of cloud storage, holding everything from Virgil's poetry to provincial grain reports. A single ship arriving in Ostia could carry hundreds of these scrolls in its hold, delivering information as efficiently as a modern data packet crossing the Atlantic. The real workhorse of daily communication, though, was the humble wax tablet. These reusable notebooks consisted of wooden frames filled with beeswax, often hinged together in diptychs or triptychs like an ancient laptop. Using a pointed stylus, merchants could jot down sales figures, students practiced their letters, and officers drafted battlefield reports, then smooth the wax flat to erase and start anew. It's hard not to see parallels with our modern devices: the stylus gliding through wax like a touchscreen pen, the satisfying snap of closing tablets to protect their contents, even the way important documents were preserved by copying them onto more permanent papyrus, a precursor to hitting save as. Some tablets even had small holes drilled through them so they could be threaded onto cords, creating chained sets that resemble nothing so much as an ancient version of a folder directory. What made these materials revolutionary was their standardization. Just as today's PDFs look identical whether opened in Tokyo or Toronto, Roman scrolls followed consistent formats empire-wide. Official documents used specific margins, handwriting styles, and even abbreviations. Think of it as the HTML of antiquity. A legal scroll from Gaul would be instantly recognizable to a clerk in Alexandria, with key details like dates and signatures always appearing in the same locations. This uniformity allowed information to flow seamlessly across cultures and languages, binding the empire together through shared bureaucratic practices. Durability was another unsung advantage. While we panic when a hard drive crashes, Roman documents were built to last. The Vindolanda tablets, thin slices of wood found at a British fort, still bear legible ink writing after 2,000 years buried in damp soil. Pompeii's carbonized scrolls, though unreadable until recent imaging breakthroughs, survived volcanic eruption temperatures that would melt a smartphone. Even the wax tablets had a backup system. Important contracts were often scratched into the wood beneath the wax as a fail-safe, creating a sort of read-only memory beneath the erasable surface. The scale of Roman record-keeping would feel familiar to any data center technician. At the empire's height, Rome's tabularium stored millions of scrolls tracking everything from census data to Senate decrees. Provincial governors maintained duplicate archives, creating a distributed network of information that could be cross-referenced for accuracy. When Pliny the Elder compiled his Natural History, a 37-volume encyclopedia citing over 2,000 sources, he was essentially crowdsourcing knowledge from across the empire's database. Perhaps the most striking parallel lies in how these materials shaped intellectual life. Just as the internet allows ideas to spread virally, Roman writing tools enabled unprecedented knowledge sharing. Philosophers could debate via exchanged scrolls, creating threaded conversations across continents. Lawyers built case law by citing precedent from archived trials, much like linking to past articles. Even graffiti in Pompeii shows how ordinary people used writing to argue, joke, and advertise a social media feed carved into plaster walls. What we're really seeing is the birth of information culture. The Romans didn't just invent storage devices, they created an ecosystem where knowledge could be captured, organized, and retrieved with startling efficiency. Their scrolls and tablets were the tangible expression of an empire that understood just as we do today, that power belongs to those who control the flow of information. The medium has changed from wax to silicon, but the human impulse remains the same: to leave our mark, to make our thoughts last, to ensure the message outlives the messenger. Libraries in ancient Rome weren't just quiet halls for scholars, they were the empire's original data centers, massive repositories where knowledge lived, organized, and spread across the known world. Think of the legendary Library of Alexandria, though technically Greek, as Rome's cultural inheritance. It wasn't just a building filled with scrolls, it was a meticulously catalogued archive where every book was tagged, summarized, and cross-referenced by a team of librarians who functioned like ancient search engines. Scholars could request texts by author, subject, or even opening lines, with attendants retrieving them from labeled shelves like querying a database. At its peak, Alexandria held an estimated 500,000 scrolls, equivalent to millions of modern printed pages, making it the closest thing antiquity had to a server farm humming with information. But Rome didn't just inherit Greek knowledge, it built its own neural network of libraries. Take the Bibliotheca Olpia, Emperor Trajan's crowning intellectual achievement. Nestled in his sprawling forum, this twin-chambered marvel housed Greek texts in one wing and Latin in the other, creating a physical mirror of the empire's bilingual brain. Unlike today's intangible cloud storage, these libraries were monuments to information, soaring halls lined with cedar shelves to repel insects, climate-controlled rooms to slow decay, and reading tables bathed in natural light. They weren't passive storage, they were active hubs where scribes copied crumbling scrolls onto fresh papyrus, an ancient form of data migration ensuring no knowledge was lost to time. The real genius lay in their distribution system. Rome didn't rely on a single central library, it built provincial branches from Britain to Syria, each stocked with duplicate scrolls shipped from the capital. Imagine a decentralized network where a lawyer in Ephesus could reference the same legal texts as a senator in Rome, or a doctor in Carthage could study Galen's medical treatises without traveling. This wasn't just scholarship, it was replication at scale, ensuring knowledge survived even if one library burned. When Vesuvius buried Pompeii's libraries in ash, identical scrolls sat safely in Naples and Rome, preserved like backup servers in separate locations. What truly makes these libraries the ancient internet's backbone is how they standardized information. Scrolls were catalogued using the Pinax, a 120-volume master index that functioned like the empire's original Dewey Decimal System. Works were tagged by genre, author, and even authenticity, rating some scrolls bore stamps marking them as verified copies, the Roman equivalent of SSL certificates validating trusted sources. Scholars could browse by topic or follow citation trails between texts, creating a web of linked knowledge centuries before hyperlinks existed, but the comparison goes deeper than storage. Like modern data centers facing hacking and censorship, Roman libraries battled intellectual threats. Emperors routinely purged dangerous texts. Caligula banned Homer for promoting Greek ideals over Roman ones, while Christian emperors later scrubbed pagan works from collections. Fire was the ultimate denial of service attack. When Julius Caesar accidentally burned Alexandria's docks, flames leaped to the library, erasing an estimated 40,000 irreplaceable scrolls in what historians still call antiquity's greatest data loss. Perhaps the most poignant parallel is access. Just as today's internet promises democratized knowledge but hinges on infrastructure, Roman libraries balanced openness with exclusivity. Public reading rooms welcomed citizens of all classes, yet the finest collections remained locked in imperial palaces or elite academies. A merchant might hear Plato quoted in the forum, but touching the actual scroll. That required connections or wealth, an ancient digital divide separating those who consumed information from those who controlled it. In the silent halls of these libraries, we see the birth of information as empire. The Romans understood that conquest wasn't just about controlling land. It was about controlling memory, about ensuring their laws, literature, and history outlasted marble monuments. Their librarians weren't just caretakers, they were the first sysadmins, fighting entropy with every copied scroll, preserving civilization's heartbeat one painstaking character at a time. The medium has changed from papyrus to pixels, but the mission remains identical, to build something that remembers even when we forget. While the imperial courier system handled official business, ordinary Romans relied on a bustling private sector of messengers called tabellarii, the ancient equivalent of hitting send on an email. These professional letter carriers formed the backbone of personal and commercial communication, crisscrossing the empire with everything from love letters to shipping manifests. Unlike the Cursus Publicus with its strict government access, tabellarii operated like a proto-postal service available to anyone who could pay. Wealthy families employed them full-time, while merchants pooled resources to share messengers along popular trade routes. What made these private couriers remarkable was their adaptability. Some specialized in lightning-fast deliveries, racing between major cities with urgent contracts or family news. Others followed predictable circuits like modern mail carriers, visiting provincial towns on fixed schedules that let villagers time their correspondence. The poet Martial grumbles in one epigram about a tabellarius who kept showing up right as he was drafting replies, proof that even in ancient Rome, communication could feel uncomfortably immediate. Their business models would feel familiar today. Just as we choose between standard and express shipping, Romans could pay premium rates for priority service or save money with slower group deliveries. Some tabellarii even offered tracking of sorts. Wealthy clients in Alexandria might receive receipts noting which caravan their scrolls had joined and the expected arrival date in Rome. The Vindolanda tablets preserve one such tracking number, a wooden slip that reads, 2 letters for Lucius from his brother, placed with the trader Secundus departing the Ides of March. Security was equally sophisticated. Important letters traveled in locked document cases with wax seals pressed by signet rings acting as tamper-proof verification. Business correspondence often included 2 copies sent by separate messengers, an ancient fail-safe against lost packets. And just as we encrypt sensitive emails today, Cicero describes using code phrases in letters carried by tabellarii when discussing political intrigue. One surviving note from a Roman banker instructs his tabellarius to memorize the message, then destroy the physical copy, the first-century version of Snapchat's disappearing messages. The scale of their operations reveals how deeply communication permeated Roman life. In Ostria's port alone, archaeologists have found over 200 tabellarii name stamps used to mark shipments, a proof of an industry as organized as modern courier companies. These messengers didn't just carry scrolls, they transported the lifeblood of commerce, carrying everything from wine orders to stock updates that kept the empire's economy humming. One preserved ledger from Pompeii shows a single tabellarius delivering 38 business letters in 1 month along the Naples-Rome route, ancient bulk mailing at its finest. Where the comparison gets truly fascinating is in reliability. Despite lacking GPS or weather forecasts, tabellarii achieved astonishing consistency. Ship captains knew to reserve space for messenger bags alongside cargo. Innkeepers along major roads maintained rooms specifically for couriers to rest. Even bandits often let tabellarii pass unharmed, not out of kindness, but because stealing someone's mail guaranteed retaliation from local merchants. This unspoken protection racket meant a letter sent from Hispania to Syria had better survival odds than some modern packages. The system's true legacy lies in how it shrank the empire psychologically. For a Roman merchant in Londinium, knowing he could get a response from his partner in Carthage within 2 months rather than waiting for the annual trading fleet revolutionized business. Families separated by military postings could share news faster than ever before, and when Pliny the Younger urgently needed expert opinions on treating his sick slaves, tabularii raced medical advice across 3 provinces in weeks. That ability to connect across continents didn't just move information, it transformed how Romans experienced distance itself. What we're really seeing is the birth of social networks. These messengers didn't just deliver data, they wove invisible threads between people, creating a sense of community that transcended geography. The next time you complain about slow mail, remember the tabularius who braved alpine snows or pirate-infested coastlines just to deliver someone's birthday wishes. Proof that humanity's desire to connect has always outpaced the technology available. How fast could news actually travel across the Roman Empire? Let's take one of history's most consequential moments, the death of Emperor Augustus in 14 AD. When the first emperor drew his last breath at a villa in Campania, the race to inform the empire began. Within hours, messengers mounted fresh horses and took off down the Appian Way, their saddlebags stuffed with sealed scrolls announcing the news. By the end of that first day, the news had reached Rome itself, a distance of about 130 miles covered at a gallop. From there, the message fractured into dozens of routes, branching out like a signal cascading through a network. The logistics were staggering. To reach the Rhine legions, riders would follow the Via Claudia Augusta through the Alps, swapping mounts at relay stations every few hours. Archaeologists estimate the message could have covered the 800 miles to modern-day Mainz in as little as 9 days, a blistering pace when you consider the terrain. Meanwhile, ships carried duplicates of the announcement from Ostia to Alexandria, where the news would spread up the Nile to Egypt's southern borders in about 3 weeks. Even distant Britain, separated by ocean and hostile tribes, would have known within a month thanks to a combination of fast coastal galleys and the famed Watling Street cutting across the island. Compare that to today. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away in 2022, the news reached billions globally within minutes, not through horse hooves pounding on stone, but through smartphone alerts and social media feeds. But here's what's fascinating. While our digital age wins on raw speed, the Roman system achieved something equally profound: predictability. Modern internet outages or censorship can delay information unpredictably, whereas Rome's couriers moved with mechanical precision. Historical records show governors from Gaul to Judea received critical updates within remarkably consistent timeframes, allowing the empire to function like clockwork despite continental distances. The real test of speed wasn't just distance, it was coordination. When Emperor Titus died unexpectedly in 81 AD, his brother Domitian didn't just need the news to reach Rome. He needed synchronized announcements across all military frontiers to prevent rebellions. The solution: a carefully orchestrated cascade of messengers dispatched at staggered intervals, ensuring legions from the Euphrates to the Thames heard the news in tight sequence. Some historians believe they even used fire signals to give distant commanders visual confirmation once couriers arrived, creating a hybrid system where speed and verification worked in tandem. Yet for all its efficiency, the system had vulnerabilities. Winter storms could delay ships for weeks. Bandit attacks occasionally intercepted messengers, though breaking the wax seals on imperial dispatches was a capital offense. And sometimes nature itself intervened. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, the ash cloud grounded ships and blocked roads, leaving Rome temporarily cut off from its own provinces. These gaps highlight the paradox of ancient communication, breathtakingly advanced for its time, yet forever at the mercy of geography and weather in ways our fiber optic cables never are. What ultimately made the Roman system extraordinary wasn't just velocity, it was reliability at scale. The poet Ovid, exiled to the Black Sea, lamented that letters from Rome still reached him in under 2 months despite being banished to the edge of the world. Merchants in Spain could time shipments to coincide with market updates from Syria. Even ordinary citizens, though they lacked the state's resources, could pay tabularii to deliver messages with nearly modern-grade consistency. That's the untold story here. 2,000 years before satellites, the Romans built a communication web so dependable it made an empire spanning 3 continents feel like a single, interconnected realm. The difference between then and now isn't just technology, it's expectation. We rage when a web page takes 3 seconds to load, but Roman senators waited weeks for battlefield reports without complaint. Yet in another sense, their achievement dwarfs ours. They tamed an entire continent's distances without electricity, without combustion engines, using nothing but paved roads, galloping horses, and an unshakable belief that information should flow as freely as water. The next time your phone buzzes with a notification, take a second to marvel at how far we've come, and how much farther they went with so much less. Roman trade routes were the hidden nervous system of the empire's information network, where silk and spices moved, gossip and innovations followed. Picture a bustling port in Austria, merchants from Alexandria haggling over Egyptian grain, Syrian traders unloading glassware stamped with the latest fashions from Antioch, Spanish wine merchants swapping stories about unrest in Gaul. These weren't just economic transactions, they were live data streams carrying cultural trends, political rumors, and technological breakthroughs across continents with every ship that sailed. Much like today's e-commerce platforms quietly tracking our preferences, Roman markets aggregated information through sheer movement, turning trade hubs into living databases of the ancient world. What made these networks so powerful was their informal efficiency. While imperial couriers carried official decrees, merchants spread knowledge organically, like algorithms pushing viral content. A new farming technique perfected in North Africa might travel to Britain within a harvest season, passed from trader to trader like a trending tutorial. Architectural styles from Persia appeared in Roman villas months after caravans described them. Even religious ideas spread this way. Historians trace the early diffusion of Christianity along shipping lanes, with converts in port cities acting as nodes in an unplanned spiritual network. The parallels to modern digital marketplaces are uncanny. Think of how TikTok trends jump continents overnight, or how Amazon's recommendation engine accidentally makes obscure products globally popular. The scale of this information flow was staggering. Archaeologists find Indian peppercorns in British forts, Chinese silk in Mediterranean tombs, and Roman coins in Vietnamese markets, proof that goods weren't the only things moving. With every amphora of olive oil shipped to Germania came stories of Roman politics. Every cargo of British tin reaching Egypt carried whispers of northern tribal wars. Papyrus fragments from Egypt's garbage dumps reveal merchants' letters casually mentioning everything from gladiator match outcomes to the price spikes caused by distant droughts, ancient Yelp reviews mixed with Bloomberg updates. Security posed fascinating challenges. Just as modern platforms battle fake reviews and counterfeit goods, Roman authorities struggled with trade misinformation. Merchants were known to inflate stories of barbarian threats to justify higher prices for Baltic amber. Ship captains might suppress news of bumper harvests to manipulate grain markets. The emperor's solution, stationing imperial inspectors at major ports to verify both goods and gossip, their reports racing back to Rome via the Cursus Publicus, a primitive fact-checking system fused with supply chain logistics. The real legacy of these trade networks lies in their democratization of information. Where official channels served the state, commerce carried knowledge for everyone. A potter in Gaul could imitate designs from Greece because traders displayed samples at fairs. Farmers adopted irrigation tricks overheard in bustling forum markets. Even enslaved people transported across the empire became inadvertent knowledge carriers, bringing agricultural techniques or medicinal remedies from their homelands. This organic, bottom-up flow of ideas mirrors how today's social commerce blurs the line between shopping and learning, where a scrolling session might teach you Moroccan cooking hacks or Scandinavian parenting tips between product listings. Perhaps the most striking difference between then and now is tangibility. Our data floats invisibly between servers, while Roman information traveled clinging to physical objects, a Syrian merchant demonstrating a new loom mechanism, a sailor sketching strange animals seen in India on a wax tablet, a crate of Spanish wine arriving with cork stoppers that revolutionized storage. Every traded object was a Trojan horse carrying cultural DNA. The next time you add to cart on some global marketplace, remember, you're participating in a tradition far older than the internet, the eternal human dance where commerce and communication are inseparable partners. The Acta Diurna might just be history's first breaking news feed, a daily digest of events chiseled onto stone or metal plaques and posted in Rome's busiest squares. Imagine walking through the Forum and seeing today's headlines etched in bold letters: military victories on the Danube, scandalous divorces among the aristocracy, even grain prices and court rulings. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was mass communication stripped to its essence, a public bulletin board that kept citizens as hooked as we are to scrolling through Twitter or checking news apps. What made the Acta Diurna revolutionary wasn't just its regularity, updated daily since Julius Caesar's time, but its blend of official and gossipy content. Official decrees shared space with birth announcements, gladiator match results, and even quirky human interest stories. When a fire destroyed homes on the Aventine Hill, the Acta reported it alongside Senate debates. If a prominent senator's daughter eloped with a charioteer, you'd read about it by sundown. Sound familiar? It's the same compulsive mix of high politics and tabloid drama that keeps us refreshing our feeds today. The distribution system mirrored modern virality. While original postings stayed in Rome, scribes copied excerpts onto papyrus for provincial governors, who then shared highlights with local elites. By week's end, a juicy bit of imperial gossip might be the talk of taverns from Hispania to Syria, spreading through networks of traders, soldiers, and travelers. Some historians joke that the Acta were Rome's original retweet button, information designed to be sampled, reshared, and debated. But here's where the comparison gets eerie. Just as social media algorithms curate what we see, the Acta weren't neutral. Emperors used them to shape public opinion, emphasizing military triumphs while downplaying defeats. After the disastrous Battle of Teutoburg Forest, Augustus famously edited the reports to soften the blow, an ancient spin doctor controlling the narrative. Critics like Tacitus sneered at how the Acta reduced complex events to soundbites, proving that complaints about dumbed-down news are older than parchment. Accessibility was another game-changer. While elite Romans had private sources, ordinary citizens, even enslaved people, could gather around the posted bulletins, listening as literate bystanders read aloud. This created a shared information sphere where a fishmonger and a banker might discuss the same headlines, much like how today's memes and news clips bridge social divides. Archaeologists have found references to the Acta scrawled on Pompeii's walls, proof that their reach extended far beyond the capital. Yet for all their modernity, the Acta had limitations we'd find baffling today. Corrections nearly impossible once carved in stone, comment sections unless you were a senator, feedback meant grumbling in the streets. And while we complain about information overload, Romans faced the opposite problem. News traveled only as fast as the fastest ship or horse, leaving distant provinces days or weeks behind. The real legacy of the Acta Diurna isn't just in how it informed citizens, but in how it revealed an eternal truth. Humans will always crave real-time updates, whether etched on marble or glowing on screens. The medium changes, the pace quickens, but the hunger to know, to be part of the conversation, remains unchanged since the first chisels struck stone in the Forum 2,000 years ago. Latin wasn't just the language of Rome. It was the operating system that made the entire empire's information network function. Imagine trying to run today's internet without standardized protocols like TCP/IP, where every website used its own rules for sending data. Chaos, right, that's exactly the problem the Romans solved by making Latin the empire's universal language. From the misty highlands of Scotland to the sun-baked markets of North Africa, a tax collector in Britannia could file reports that a bureaucrat in Alexandria could read without hesitation. Military orders issued along the Rhine frontier arrived in Syria with perfect clarity. Even simple merchant contracts followed Latin templates so predictable that archaeologists find nearly identical loan agreements scratched onto wax tablets from Spain to Egypt. This linguistic standardization went far deeper than just words. Latin became the empire's metadata, a framework that structured how information itself was organized. Legal documents used prescribed formats with dates, names, and sums always appearing in the same sequence, much like how web forms today demand your address before credit card details. Abbreviations like SPQR, Senatus Populus Romanus, functioned as universal tags, instantly recognizable across cultures. Even the empire's milestones, inscribed with standardized distance markers, worked like ancient URLs telling travelers exactly where they stood in the network. The parallels to modern internet protocols are striking. Just as TCP/IP breaks data into uniform packets for reliable transmission, Latin broke complex ideas into predictable grammatical structures. Verbs always came at the end of sentences, creating a built-in checksum that helped listeners confirm they'd received the full message. Legal and military Latin evolved into an even more rigid dialect akin to machine code, where every word carried precise, unambiguous meaning. A single misplaced syllable in a governor's edict could spark rebellions, so the language became a precision instrument. But here's what's truly fascinating. Latin's dominance wasn't enforced through suppression of local languages. Much like how today's internet accommodates every language while relying on English for back-end coding, the Romans let provinces keep their native tongues for daily life. Greek remained the language of philosophy and Eastern trade. Celtic and Punic persisted in villages, but when it came to imperial business, everyone switched to Latin, the original runtime environment for bureaucratic transactions. The system's brilliance lay in its scalability. As new territories joined the empire, Latin spread not through coercion but necessity. Local elites learned it to negotiate with Roman officials, merchants adopted it to access wider markets, and soldiers picked it up to understand orders. Over time, this created a layered linguistic landscape where regional dialects blended with Latin, the ancient equivalent of localized versions of software, all compatible with the central operating system. Yet, like any protocol, Latin had its vulnerabilities. Mispronunciations in frontier provinces could distort meanings, a problem as serious as a corrupted data packet today. Some governors maintained bilingual scribes to double-check translations, much like modern error-checking algorithms. And when the Western Empire collapsed, Latin fragmented into regional variants, just as an outdated protocol might fork into incompatible versions. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just the language itself, but what it enabled. Standardized Latin turned the Mediterranean world into a unified information space where ideas could flow without friction. A farming technique developed in Gaul could be documented in a Latin manual and implemented in Tunisia within a growing season. Medical knowledge from Greek texts translated into Latin spread to army doctors across the empire. Even Christianity's explosive growth owes a debt to this linguistic infrastructure. Paul's letters circulated widely because they were written in the empire's universal code. The real lesson here isn't about words, it's about networks. Whether it's Latin scrolls moving along Roman roads or data packets flashing through fiber optic cables, the principle remains the same. Communication thrives on common rules. The Romans didn't just build roads and courier systems, they built the first truly interoperable civilization, proving that an empire's strength lies not in its swords but in its shared syntax. The Roman bureaucracy wasn't just paperwork, it was the empire's living firewall, a vast human algorithm filtering information with ruthless precision. Picture an imperial clerk in Rome's tabularium, surrounded by towering shelves of scrolls, his reed pen scratching as he cross-references tax reports from Gaul against grain shipments from Egypt. Every line he annotates, every duplicate he stamps, every document he rejects shapes the flow of knowledge across 3 continents. This wasn't mere record-keeping. It was information control on a scale that would make modern tech giants nod in recognition. Just as firewalls today block malicious data packets, Rome's bureaucrats screened out anything threatening the empire's stability: rebellious speeches, counterfeit currency claims, even rumors that might spark unrest. At its core, this system relied on layers of verification eerily similar to digital security protocols. Provincial governors sent dispatches in triplicate, one copy by ship, another by land, and a third held locally, ensuring at least one would evade pirates or storms. Upon arrival in Rome, scribes compared these against central archives, flagging inconsistencies like malware detectors spotting corrupted files. Military reports underwent even stricter scrutiny. Legion commanders had to include witness signatures for casualty counts, a practice as meticulous as multi-factor authentication. When Emperor Augustus discovered some governors were inflating barbarian threats to secure extra troops, he instituted mandatory ground truth audits. Dispatched officials would ride to frontier outposts and physically verify battle damage before funds were released. The censorship parallels are equally striking. Rome's aediles officials overseeing public morals acted as living content filters, scouring booksellers for banned texts and monitoring theater scripts for subversive themes. After Julius Caesar's assassination, the Senate ordered all copies of his will confiscated until sensitive passages about leaving money to the public could be redacted. Later emperors employed entire offices to sanitize the Acta Diurna, scrubbing unfavorable news before it reached provincial bulletin boards. Yet just like modern users finding VPN workarounds, dissidents adapted. Philosophers circulated forbidden Stoic texts via merchant networks, while critics hid controversial verses in seemingly innocent love poems, the ancient equivalent of steganography, encoding messages in cat memes. Tax collection reveals the system's most sophisticated data processing. Every 5 years, census takers fanned across the empire, recording not just population counts but land values, trade goods, even livestock numbers. These datasets flowed to Rome, where teams of liberty-educated freedmen crunched numbers on abacus boards, calculating tax quotas with algorithmic precision. One surviving papyrus from Egypt shows a clerk's worksheet adjusting a farmer's grain tax based on flood damage, reports from 3 separate villages, an ancient spreadsheet reconciling real-time data. The system even had built-in error correction. If a province's payment was late, automated penalties accrued, but governors could appeal with notarized proof of disasters like droughts or barbarian raids. But the true masterpiece of bureaucratic control was the Cursus Honorum, Rome's career ladder for officials. Just as admin privileges restrict access on modern networks, this hierarchy determined who could send which types of information. A low-ranking quaestor could dispatch routine tax reports, but only a praetor's seal authorized military dispatches. The highest-tier consular rank granted access to the ultimate admin panel, the Senate's secret archives, where sensitive treaties and intelligence reports were stored under physical lock and key. Unauthorized copying was punishable by death, a draconian deterrent against data leaks. This tiered access prevented chaos. When Emperor Claudius briefly let junior clerks issue edicts, the empire nearly collapsed under contradictory orders until he reinstated strict permissions. What ultimately made this system groundbreaking wasn't its rigidity, it was its adaptability. When volcanic ash obscured shipping lanes, clerks in Ostia automatically rerouted grain shipments to alternate ports using pre-approved contingency plans. During the Jewish revolt, Rome's bureaucracy executed a coordinated information blackout, suppressing rebel messages while amplifying imperial propaganda along every channel. Even the Vindolanda tablets, those fragile wooden notes from a British fort, reveal standardized request forms where quartermasters logged supply needs in triplicate, with one copy sent up the chain, one filed locally, and one given to the soldier as a receipt. The lesson here transcends antiquity. Rome's bureaucracy proved that information isn't just power, it's the scaffolding holding civilization together. Whether it's a clerk in the tabularium verifying tax rolls or a server farm scanning for cyber threats, the goal remains identical: to separate signal from noise, truth from chaos, keeping the system alive another day. The firewalls change, but the battle doesn't. Aqueducts weren't just Rome's water supply, they were the empire's original broadband, a high-speed network channeling life's most essential resource with the same precision as fiber optic cables carry data today. Picture the Pont du Gard, that staggering three-tiered aqueduct bridging France's Garden River. Its graceful arches weren't just architectural flair, they were the optimized routing of their time, carrying water 50 kilometers from spring to city with a gradient so precise it dropped only 17 meters over the entire distance. That's an engineering tolerance of just 1 foot per mile, akin to modern networks minimizing latency to keep streams buffer-free. The parallels run deeper than structure. Like internet traffic prioritizing video calls over email, aqueducts used settling tanks and Chinese letter systems to filter and direct water based on quality. Drinking water flowed through lead pipes to fountains, while less clean supplies irrigated gardens or flushed sewers. Maintenance crews patrolled access tunnels much like network technicians monitor server halls, clearing mineral buildup to prevent information bottlenecks. Even the water towers at Journey's End functioned as ancient data centers, distributing flows to neighborhoods based on demand, with wealthier districts receiving higher bandwidth through wider pipes. What truly cements the metaphor is how aqueducts transformed Roman society. Just as reliable internet enables remote work and telehealth, constant running water revolutionized daily life. Public baths became social hubs where citizens exchanged news as freely as we do in comment sections. Fountains in poorer districts turned access to clean water from a luxury into a public utility, an ancient net neutrality ensuring even the marginalized stayed connected to this liquid network. Engineers even built redundancy into the system. When drought struck Chinese letter, auxiliary channels could reroute supply from another, mirroring how modern networks switch to backup servers during outages. The genius of these water highways lies in their silent ubiquity. Much like we rarely think about the submarine cables carrying our cat videos, most Romans never saw the aqueducts snaking through hillsides. They simply turned a tap and expected water to flow. Yet without this invisible infrastructure, Rome couldn't have sustained its million-strong population any more than a city today could function without Wi-Fi. Both systems share the same paradox. They're most impressive not when they work, but when they disappear entirely into the fabric of everyday life. Perhaps the most poignant parallel is fragility. Just as a single severed cable can disrupt global internet traffic, invading Goths crippled Rome in 537 AD by cutting just 2 aqueducts. Within days, a city accustomed to endless flowing water descended into panic, proof that civilizations, ancient or digital, are only as resilient as the network sustaining them. The next time you sip tap water or stream a video, remember, the difference between those acts isn't nearly as vast as 2,000 years might suggest. Both are just engineered channels carrying what a society values most. Julius Caesar didn't just conquer Gaul, he revolutionized information security with a cipher so simple, it's still taught in cryptography classes today. Picture a Roman general hunched over a wax tablet, shifting every letter in his message 3 places down the alphabet. A became D, B turned to E, and so on until ordinary words transformed into gibberish to anyone without the key. This wasn't just clever wordplay, it was military-grade encryption protecting troop movements and supply requests from prying eyes. What's astonishing isn't just that the Romans used codes, but how systematically they deployed them across their sprawling empire, turning every scrambled dispatch into a locked chest of secrets. The Caesar cipher worked because it balanced complexity with practicality. Unlike modern encryption requiring computer power, this system needed only a literate soldier who could count to 3. When Crassus faced Spartacus rebels, his coded orders arrived with instructions to subtract 3 letters, an early example of symmetric key encryption where the same key locked and unlocked the message. Archaeologists have found similar ciphers scratched onto lead curse tablets, proving even ordinary citizens grasped the power of obscuring information. One tablet from Britannia reads QHWs, when decrypted reveals Potter, likely a stolen kiln design or a love charm meant to evade the gods' notice. But the Romans didn't stop at letter shifting. For high-stakes communications, they layered physical security with their codes. Important scrolls were sealed inside wooden cylinders called scapi, their wax impressions stamped with the emperor's ring, a dual authentication system requiring both the physical seal and knowledge of the cipher to access the content. Break the seal without authorization, and the penalty mirrored modern hacking consequences: execution. Suetonius recounts how Caesar's own stepson nearly faced the sword after accidentally opening a sealed dispatch meant for his rival Pompey. The ingenuity truly shines in their adaptive strategies. When Caesar suspected his cipher was compromised during the Gallic Wars, he switched to multilingual encoding, writing messages in Greek, then applying the cipher to the Greek letters. This added a second cryptographic layer, much like today's password salting techniques. Provincial governors took it further, embedding coded phrases within seemingly mundane letters. A surviving papyrus from Egypt mentions the Nile floods early this year, which decrypted warned of a tax revolt brewing in Thebes. Even the Acta Diurna employed subtle abbreviations SPQ instead of SPQR, signaled an editorialized version of Senate proceedings not to be trusted at face value. What makes these encryption methods remarkable is their scale. Every legion maintained a clerk called a numerarius trained in cipher protocols. Military outposts from the Rhine to the Euphrates kept codebooks listing current keys, rotated monthly like modern password updates. Merchants developed their own ciphers too. The Vindolanda tablets contain wool traders using number substitution to hide profit margins from competitors. This wasn't just elite knowledge, it was a society-wide recognition that information, like gold, needed safeguarding in transit. The vulnerabilities seem obvious now. A cipher shifting letters predictably is child's play to crack today. But in a world where most couldn't read even plain Latin, these methods were revolutionary. When Augustus intercepted a coded message from Mark Antony's fleet, it took his team of Greek linguists weeks to break it, an eternity in wartime that cost Antony dearly. The Romans understood what every cybersecurity expert knows today. Encryption isn't about perfect secrecy, but buying enough time for information to lose its tactical value. Their legacy lives on beyond historical curiosity. Modern digital encryption still relies on the same core principle Caesar used, transforming information into something only the intended recipient can decode. The next time you see that little padlock icon in your browser, remember, you're using the spiritual successor to a system refined by Roman generals 2,000 years ago, proving that while technology evolves, the battle to protect secrets never changes. The bustling markets of ancient Rome didn't just trade goods, they moved money with a sophistication that would feel eerily familiar to anyone using digital banking today. At the heart of this system were the Argentarii, Rome's merchant bankers who operated something akin to a pre-industrial financial network. Picture a crowded street near the Forum, where these money handlers sat behind wooden tables piled with coins from every corner of the empire. A merchant from Alexandria could deposit gold in Egypt, walk into an Argentarius office in Rome days later and withdraw local currency minus a small fee, an ancient version of wire transfers without the wires. Their ledgers, meticulously kept on wax tablets, tracked debits and credits across provinces with the precision of modern accounting software, creating a financial web stretching from Britain to Babylon. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just its reach, it was the innovations we'd now call fintech. The Argentarii developed proto-checks called prescriptions, allowing clients to authorize payments to third parties without physical coins changing hands. Surviving records show transactions as nuanced as partial loan repayments or conditional transfers tied to ship arrivals, financial instruments as complex as today's escrow services. One tablet from Pompeii details a transaction where a wine merchant instructed his banker to release payment to a ceramic supplier only after inspecting the delivered amphorae for cracks. That's contractual fine print worthy of any modern terms of service agreement. The real magic happened in long-distance trade. Just as e-commerce platforms handle currency conversions automatically, the Argentarii mastered arbitrage. They maintained real-time exchange rates for dozens of currencies: Greek drachmas, Egyptian deben, Celtic staters, adjusting for metal purity and transport risks. A trader in Carthage could purchase Spanish olive oil using a line of credit backed by future silk sales in Syria, all facilitated through linked banking networks. Archaeologists have uncovered chains of loan agreements spanning 4 provinces, with interest calculated down to the daily rate like today's microfinancing apps. Security measures mirrored our own digital safeguards. Important transactions required seals from both parties and witnesses, a multi-signature authentication process. Fraudulent bankers faced exile or worse. Roman law treated financial crimes as harshly as violent offenses. Some Argentarii even used coded marks in their ledgers, a primitive form of transaction hashing to prevent tampering. When Mount Vesuvius erupted, one banker's records survived carbonized but legible, showing a last-minute flurry of payments as clients desperately settled debts before the ash fell, a first-century version of panic selling before a market crash. The system's true genius lay in its democratization of capital. Unlike modern banking's roots in elite institutions, Rome's financial network served everyone from senators to street vendors. Soldiers' paychecks traveled as deposits to their home provinces. Freedwomen ran lending operations funding spice caravans. Even enslaved people could hold savings accounts, the equivalent of today's digital wallets, with some using accumulated tips to buy their freedom. This liquidity supercharged the empire's economy, allowing ambitious ventures like the Nile grain fleet or Spanish silver mines to secure funding across continents. Perhaps the most telling parallel is how these bankers handled information asymmetry. Just as credit scores today predict reliability, Argentarii maintained informal blacklists of defaulters shared through merchant guilds. A trader who reneged on deals in Antioch would find credit lines frozen in Gaul within months, an ancient algorithm of reputation tracking. They even pioneered corporate structures. The Societates Publicanorum pooled investor capital for large projects like tax collection or aqueduct construction, issuing tradable shares that fluctuated based on project risks. What emerges isn't just a primitive bank, it's the DNA of global finance. The Argentarii proved that money flows fastest when untethered from physical coins, when trust becomes the real currency. Their ledgers didn't just record transactions, they wove an empire together through threads of reciprocal obligation, proving that economies, whether powered by wax tablets or blockchain, ultimately run on human relationships. The next time you tap your phone to pay, remember, you're participating in a ritual far older than apps or algorithms, one those Roman bankers would recognize in a heartbeat. The Romans built their information empire on an uncomfortable truth. Some of its most critical nodes weren't fiber optic cables or server farms, but enslaved minds. Among the toiling masses in aristocratic villas and scriptoriums, a specialized class of educated slaves performed work that mirrors our modern routers and processors, copying, translating, and transmitting the empire's knowledge. These weren't just scribes, they were living conduits of culture, their trained hands turning wax tablets and papyrus into the empire's distributed database. A Greek slave in a senator's household might spend dawn to dusk copying legal texts while simultaneously interpreting for visiting diplomats, his brain simultaneously storing, translating, and transmitting information like a human version of today's mesh network. The scale of their labor is staggering to contemplate. Before the printing press, every book in Rome existed only as long as enslaved hands could replicate it. A single wealthy household might employ dozens of literate slaves, some copying scrolls in specialized rooms called scriptoria, others proofreading or arranging volumes in private libraries. The poet Martial jokes about the slave Ligurius, whose cramped handwriting allowed him to cram Homer's entire Odyssey onto a single parchment codex, a feat akin to modern data compression. But their work went far beyond rote transcription. Skilled slaves corrected errors in philosophical texts, cross-referenced medical scrolls for inconsistencies, even compiled personalized anthologies, acting as both storage drives and algorithms filtering signal from noise. What makes this system so unsettlingly modern is its parallels to how we treat digital infrastructure today. Just as we take routers and cloud servers for granted invisible until they malfunction, the Romans rarely acknowledged these enslaved intellectuals as people. Cicero's letters mention his slave Tyro, who invented shorthand to record speeches in real time with the same casual pride we'd reserve for a new app. Pliny the Elder's massive encyclopedia credits hundreds of sources but never names the hands that copied and organized them, treating human labor as interchangeable as server racks. Even their bodies were commodified. Young slaves with elegant handwriting fetched higher prices at markets, while those versed in multiple languages commanded premiums like multilingual operating systems. Yet contradictions abound. Some literate slaves wielded surprising influence, their expertise making them indispensable. The slave philosopher Epictetus taught Stoicism to Rome's elite while legally owning nothing, his lectures later transcribed by students. Imperial secretaries, often enslaved Greeks, sometimes controlled access to emperors, filtering petitions like administrative firewalls. Archaeologists have found graffiti in Pompeii's servant quarters showing mathematical calculations and draft translations, proof that knowledge seeped beyond formal roles. Just as today's AI learns from unintended data, these enslaved routers occasionally processed information in ways their owners never intended. A bilingual slave might mistranslate a cruel order, or a copyist subtly alter a legal text to favor the vulnerable. The system's fragility reveals its true nature. When Vesuvius erupted, one wealthy Roman reportedly offered his entire estate to save his library slaves, not out of compassion, but because their trained minds were irreplaceable storage media. After the fall of Rome, as literacy declined and scriptoria vanished, Europe would spend centuries reconstructing lost knowledge. Those anonymous copyists had been the empire's true backup drives, their labor the only thread preventing cultural amnesia. Perhaps the cruelest irony lies in the legacy they unintentionally built. The very texts these enslaved hands preserved, Cicero's paeans to liberty, stoic musings on human dignity, would later inspire abolitionists. The routers, in the end, transmitted ideas powerful enough to undermine the system that exploited them. Their story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about our own networks. Who are the invisible processors making modern information flow, and how will history judge our reliance on them? The past rarely offers clean analogies, but the echoes here are too resonant to ignore. Senate debates in ancient Rome weren't just closed-door affairs. They were the empire's original live broadcast, a spectacle of rhetoric and power designed to ripple far beyond the curier's marble walls. Picture the scene, Cicero rising to denounce Catiline, his voice echoing through the Senate chamber as teams of scribes scratched every word onto wax tablets in real time. These weren't mere note-takers, they were human recording devices, their styluses racing to capture the political theater unfolding before them. Within hours, those hasty notes would be polished into coherent transcripts, copied onto papyrus scrolls, and dispatched across the empire. Senatorial hot takes racing down the Appian Way faster than modern press releases clear corporate PR departments. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just its speed. It was the deliberate packaging of political discourse for mass consumption. Skilled scribes didn't transcribe verbatim. They edited for impact, trimming rambling digressions just as live stream producers today cut dead air. The resulting scrolls highlighted rhetorical flourishes, noted dramatic pauses, even included stage directions like applause or murmurs of dissent. Archaeologists have found fragments where scribes added marginal commentary. Here Crassus looked to Pompey for support, transforming dry transcripts into immersive narratives. These weren't government records, they were performance pieces, the ancient equivalent of televised debates with all the dramatic artifice intact. The distribution channels mirrored modern media ecosystems. Official copies went to provincial governors for policy implementation, while juicier excerpts leaked to the acta diurna for public consumption. Wealthy patrons paid for premium editions annotated with insider context. Think of it as the Patreon subscription model of antiquity. Philosophers like Seneca complain about entrepreneurs stitching together sensational soundbites from debates, creating decontextualized clips that inflamed partisan passions. Sound familiar? It's the same cycle of amplification and distortion that plagues today's social media snippets. Accessibility created unexpected democratic effects. Though only senators could debate, anyone with literacy from merchants to freedmen could read the transcripts. The speeches of Cotto the Younger circulated so widely that his populist rants reached frontier garrisons before the official decrees they protested. When Julius Caesar published his Antiquity rebuttals, taverns from Hispania to Syria buzzed with comparisons, proving that political discourse could go viral long before hashtags existed. Even enslaved intellectuals participated indirectly. Educated Greeks in aristocratic households often summarized debates for their masters, adding their own subtle spins like living recommendation algorithms. The system's sophistication emerges in its security protocols. Sensitive debates employed closed session rules. Scribes swore oaths to record nothing, a precursor to modern off-the-record agreements. Transcripts of military discussions were encrypted using Caesar's cipher before dispatch. One surviving scroll from the Carthage archives shows redaction marks where a governor censored passages about troop deployments, proving that information control was as vital then as classified document protocols are today. Yet for all its modernity, the system suffered timeless flaws. Transcripts often arrived in provinces weeks after decisions took effect, rendering public debate moot. Ambitious senators like Clodius hired their own scribes to produce alternative transcripts, smearing rivals the fake news of the late Republic. And without audio backups, history depended on whose scribes survived to tell the tale. After Cicero's execution, Mark Antony's supporters systematically destroyed copies of his Philippics, a chilling parallel to digital censorship in our era. The real legacy of these Senate reports isn't just in how they informed the empire, it's how they reveal the unchanging nature of political theater. Then as now, leaders crafted speeches for multiple audiences, the peers in the room, the distant masses reading transcripts, and the historians who'd judge them later. The medium has evolved from wax tablets to 4K streams, but the game remains the same: to persuade, to perform, and above all, to ensure the right version of events outlasts the competition. When Tacitus lamented that the more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws, he might as well have been describing the endless scroll of our own political feeds. The cult of Isis didn't just spread through the Roman Empire. It went viral, riding the empire's communication networks like a divine meme. Picture a merchant ship docking in Ostia, its hold crammed with Egyptian grain and something far more contagious: the allure of a goddess who promised resurrection, secret knowledge, and a direct line to the afterlife. Within weeks, sailors and traders carried her rituals up the Tiber to Rome's slums, where frescoes of Isis cradling Horus appeared in backstreet shrines. Within months, her initiates were whispering sacred hymns in Gaulish hill forts and North African villas. This wasn't top-down conversion. It was organic, peer-to-peer sharing, the ancient equivalent of a subreddit spawning global devotees. What made Isis's cult so explosively shareable? Like modern digital communities, it offered exclusivity and belonging. Initiates underwent dramatic ceremonies, blindfolded, subjected to simulated deaths, then reborn through symbolic Nile waters. These rituals weren't just worship, they were immersive content designed to be retold in tantalizing fragments. A baker in Pompeii might describe the eerie torchlit procession she'd witnessed to her neighbor, who'd share it with his cousin in Naples, each retelling amplifying curiosity. The cult's iconography functioned like shareable media, striking images of Isis with outstretched wings or holding the Ankh cross traveled on amulets and household shrines, spreading her brand recognition empire-wide. Archaeologists find nearly identical statuettes from Londinium to Damascus, proof of a visual language as consistent as today's meme formats. The logistics of this spiritual virality reveal uncanny parallels to digital networks. Isis's priesthood operated like ancient influencers, strategically planting temples in port cities, first Alexandria, Piraeus, Ostia, where ideas spread fastest. They adapted rituals locally, syncretizing Isis with Celtic horse goddesses in Gaul or sea nymphs in coastal towns, much like how trending sounds get remixed across TikTok cultures. When Pompeii's temple was destroyed in the 62 AD earthquake, donations poured in from initiates as far as Syria, illustrating the kind of crowdsourced rebuilding familiar to Patreon campaigns. But the real stroke of genius was the cult's use of existing infrastructure. Pilgrims traveled with coded symbols, lotus flowers, or sistrum rattles, identifying fellow devotees to secure lodging and safe passage, functioning like encrypted group markers. Wealthy patrons funded temples along trade routes, creating spiritual waypoints that doubled as social hubs. The famed Iseum Campens in Rome wasn't just a temple. It was a networking event where traders from Alexandria might seal deals over shared devotion, blurring commerce and faith as seamlessly as LinkedIn blends professional and personal branding today. What truly cemented Isis's reach was her cult's mastery of emotional hooks. Where Roman state religion offered cold formalism, Isis promised personal salvation. Her hymns, inscribed on temple walls from the Rhine to the Euphrates, struck chords of intimate longing. "I am she who comforts the weary, who lifts up the oppressed." This viral empathy transcended class. Enslaved women and senators' wives knelt side by side in her chapels, united by #worthy slogans about divine equality. When Christian apologists later mocked Isis devotees as hysterical cultists, they missed the point. These were early adopters of a belief system that spread precisely because it made people feel seen, heard, and connected across vast distances. The backlash only proved how threatening this grassroots movement became. Emperors from Augustus to Tiberius repeatedly banned Isis worship, fearing its potential to organize dissent. In 19 AD, Tiberius crucified her priests and threw her cult statue into the Tiber, an ancient deplatforming, only for followers to regroup underground. By the 1st century, even the Senate admitted defeat, incorporating Isis into Rome's official pantheon. Her persistence demonstrated a truth we recognize today. Once an idea gains network effects, even empires struggle to contain it. The cult's legacy lingers in unexpected places. Early Christian art borrowed Isis's iconography for the Virgin Mary. her worshippers seamlessly transitioning to a new viral faith. Modern secret societies from Freemasons to neo-pagans still emulate her initiation rites. The real lesson isn't about any particular goddess, it's about how human networks, whether carved into temple stones or coded into social media apps, inevitably shape belief itself. When enough people share something with passion, whether sacred hymns or viral tweets, it ceases to be just an idea and becomes a force that can outlast empires. Pigeons might seem like an odd footnote in Rome's high-tech communication network until you realize these feathery couriers were essentially their version of Wi-Fi. While the empire's roads and signal towers formed the hardwired infrastructure, carrier pigeons offered something revolutionary: wireless messaging. Historians believe the Romans adopted the practice from Eastern empires, where Persian and Assyrian rulers had used homing pigeons for centuries. Picture a legion commander in besieged Jerusalem, scribbling a plea for reinforcements on a tiny scroll, then strapping it to a bird's leg and watching it vanish into the sky, cutting through enemy lines where even the fastest rider couldn't. No roads, no relay stations, just pure avian instinct bypassing geography like a biological radio signal. What made pigeons so valuable was their resistance to disruption. While snow could block mountain passes and storms could sink ships, these birds flew straight through chaos. Pliny the Elder marveled at their unerring sense of direction, speculating they navigated by invisible pathways in the air, an ancient intuition of magnetic fields we now understand scientifically. Their speed was breathtaking. A well-bred pigeon could cover 100 miles in a single flight, outpacing even the Cursus Publicus over short distances. When the wealthy Lucullus wanted daily updates from his coastal villa to Rome, legend says he kept a dovecote of pigeons dyed different colors to signal urgent news: red for emergencies, blue for routine reports. It's not so different from modern priority tagging in email subjects. The system's limitations, though, reveal why pigeons never replaced traditional networks. Unlike the predictable relay stations, pigeons were one-way messengers. They could only fly home, requiring carefully coordinated breeding programs to establish reliable routes. Important messages often went out in triplicate via different birds, a feathery predecessor to packet switching redundancy. And while a scroll could carry detailed battle plans, pigeon-borne notes had to be brutally concise, the original character limit. Archaeologists have found lead capsules that once held these mini-messages, some still bearing teeth marks from birds that carried them across battlefields. Humor aside, Pigeon Post highlights a deeper truth about Roman innovation. They'd use any tool that worked, from stone highways to beating wings. In our terms, they didn't care if the signal traveled by cable or satellite, only that it arrived. The next time you send a wireless file from your phone, spare a thought for those Roman pigeons, proving 2,000 years ago that sometimes the fastest network isn't the most high-tech, but the one that harnesses nature's own genius. For all its brilliance, Rome's information network wasn't without its flaws, gaps that remind us why this ancient system, no matter how advanced, never quite reached the ubiquity of our modern internet. Take speed, for instance. While imperial couriers could move urgent dispatches at breathtaking paces, ordinary citizens faced a very different reality. A merchant in Londinium sending a private letter to Carthage might wait months for a reply, especially if his message traveled with seasonal trade ships rather than the swift Cursus Publicus. Personal correspondence crawled at the mercy of commerce and weather, a far cry from today's instant messaging. Even the famed tabularii, those private couriers, were prohibitively expensive for most plebeians. The cost of sending a simple letter across the empire could equal weeks of a laborer's wages, an ancient paywall that kept the masses disconnected. Accessibility was another glaring weakness. The Cursus Publicus operated like an exclusive government intranet, its bandwidth reserved for state business. Unless you were a senator, general, or wealthy enough to bribe station masters, you couldn't tap into this high-speed network. Provincial farmers had no way to petition Rome directly. Their grievances had to funnel through local officials who might or might not bother forwarding them. This created an information hierarchy as rigid as Rome's social classes. While today's internet democratizes voices for better or worse, the Roman system amplified the powerful and silenced the poor. Even the Acta Diurna, Rome's daily bulletin, catered primarily to urban elite, its stone carvings meaningless to illiterate commoners or those living beyond major cities. Then there were the vulnerabilities. Barbarian invasions didn't just threaten borders, they severed the empire's information lifelines. When Goths overran the Balkans in the 3rd century, they deliberately targeted relay stations along the Via Militaris, crippling communication between Rome and its eastern provinces for months. Natural disasters wreaked similar havoc. Earthquakes could topple signal towers, while winter storms paralyzed both roads and shipping lanes. The system lacked true redundancy. Once a key route like the Appian Way was compromised, alternatives were often slower or non-existent. Modern networks reroute around damage automatically, but Rome's couriers had no such fail-safes. A single landslide in the Alps could isolate entire regions from imperial command. Even the famed Roman standardization had cracks. Latin might have been the empire's lingua franca, but local dialects and bureaucratic jargon still muddled messages. A tax decree written in pristine legal Latin could be misinterpreted by a Greek-speaking clerk in Antioch or a Celtic-born administrator in Gaul. Corruption added another layer of noise. Couriers were known to lose inconvenient dispatches for the right bribe, while provincial governors often sanitized bad news before forwarding it to Rome. Unlike today's encrypted digital trails, information in the ancient world was endlessly mutable, with no way to verify if a scroll's contents had been altered en route. The most telling limitation, though, was psychological. For all its engineering marvels, Rome's network couldn't escape the constraints of human endurance. Couriers collapsed from exhaustion, horses died mid-gallop, and scribes made errors after hours of squinting by oil lamp. Messages that traveled thousands of miles still hinged on someone somewhere staying awake, staying honest, staying alive. Our internet runs on cables and code. Theirs ran on flesh and willpower. That fragility made Rome's system both awe-inspiring and profoundly human, a reminder that every empire, no matter how vast, is ultimately held together by the same thin threads that bind us all: trust, effort, and the stubborn refusal to let distance silence connection. After Rome fell, Europe's communication networks didn't just slow down, they unraveled completely, leaving behind a patchwork of fragmented kingdoms where sending a simple message could become an epic ordeal. The difference was stark. What took Roman couriers mere weeks now took medieval envoys months, if the message arrived at all. Where Roman roads once formed an organized lattice of stone, post-imperial Europe relied on muddy tracks that vanished under winter floods or became bandit-haunted wilderness. The Cursus Publicus, that marvel of imperial logistics, collapsed into disrepair, its relay stations abandoned or repurposed into makeshift forts. Even the vaunted Roman signal towers fell silent, their beacon fires extinguished by tribes who saw no use for such sophisticated alerts. The consequences were profound. Charlemagne, despite ruling an empire rivaling Rome's territorial reach, struggled with communication delays so severe that by the time his orders reached the Spanish March, local governors had often already improvised their own solutions. Documents from his court reveal frustrated scribes annotating decrees with phrases like, "if still relevant," a bureaucratic shrug acknowledging messages might arrive too late to matter. Compare that to Emperor Augustus, who received near-daily dispatches from Germania and could adjust military tactics in real time. The medieval church attempted to fill the void with monastic messenger networks, but these operated at a glacial pace. A letter from Canterbury to Rome might take half a year, carried by traveling monks who prioritized pilgrimage over punctuality. What made Rome's system truly exceptional wasn't just its speed, but its universality. Medieval Europe reverted to a world where communication depended entirely on personal connections and sheer luck. A merchant in Paris wanting to contact a partner in Venice had no reliable system, just hope that some passing trader heading south might carry his scroll. Roman tabularii, those professional letter carriers, had no equivalent in the feudal era. Now, even kings relied on ad hoc messengers who might abandon their mission for better paying work. The Vindelander tablets show Roman soldiers casually sending notes about socks and dinner invitations across hundreds of miles, a level of everyday connectivity that wouldn't return until the 19th century. The intellectual cost was even steeper. Rome's libraries and archives had functioned as centralized knowledge banks, but medieval Europe's scattered scriptoria became isolated silos. A scholar in York might spend years reconstructing a text that Roman librarians could have retrieved in days. When the Black Death struck in the 14th century, towns often didn't hear about outbreaks until corpses appeared at their gates, a far cry from Rome's epidemic alerts racing along the Cursus Publicus. Even medieval innovations like university messenger systems paled in comparison. Oxford's academic network, while impressive for its time, couldn't match the seamless integration of Roman military, commercial, and governmental channels. Yet the most telling difference was psychological. Romans lived with an expectation of connectivity, that news should travel predictably, that orders should be obeyed promptly, that the empire's will could stretch from desert to forest without breaking. Medieval Europeans adapted to uncertainty, where messages might vanish en route, where rumors often outpaced facts, and where isolation was the default state. This shift wasn't just technological, it reshaped how societies functioned, making localism inevitable and central authority fragile. The dream of an interconnected world didn't fully revive until the Renaissance rediscovered Roman infrastructure, and even then, it would take railroads and telegraphs to finally surpass what Rome had achieved with parchment, horses, and sheer bureaucratic will. The silence between Rome's fall and the modern era speaks volumes. Some networks, once broken, take centuries to rebuild. The parallels between Rome's ancient networks and our modern internet are more than just fascinating historical footnotes. They reveal something fundamental about human nature. Across 2,000 years, the same driving forces persist: the hunger for connection, the need to share ideas, and the relentless pursuit of faster, more reliable ways to bridge distance. Rome's roads, couriers, and signal towers weren't just feats of engineering. They were physical manifestations of a universal impulse we now satisfy with fiber optic cables and satellites. Yet beneath the technological veneer, the core challenges remain eerily similar: how to move information quickly, keep it secure, and ensure it reaches the right people at the right time. Consider the concept of infrastructure. Just as today's internet depends on submarine cables and data centers, Rome's communication network hinged on its famed roads. Both systems share a striking duality. They're most impressive when invisible. We rarely think about the vast physical networks underpinning our digital lives until a severed cable disrupts service, just as Roman citizens likely didn't ponder the Appian Way's engineering until a landslide blocked their mail. The deeper lesson here isn't about technology, it's about how societies organize themselves around shared systems of exchange. Whether it's packets of data or scrolls in a courier's satchel, the principle is identical. Civilization thrives when information flows freely. Security concerns then, and now reveal another timeless tension. Rome's encryption methods like the Caesar cipher mirror our own endless arms race between hackers and cybersecurity. Tamper-proof wax seals and coded military dispatches serve the same purpose as today's two-factor authentication and firewalls: to protect sensitive data from falling into the wrong hands. Even the social dynamics feel familiar. Just as we grapple with misinformation spreading through social media, Roman officials struggled with merchants inflating grain prices by spreading false rumors of barbarian invasions. The tools change, but the game stays the same, controlling the narrative, managing trust, and battling those who exploit the system. Perhaps the most poignant parallel lies in access inequality. Rome's Cursus Publicus, reserved for state use, excluded ordinary citizens from its high-speed network, much like how rural communities today struggle with spotty broadband while urban centers enjoy gigabit speeds. The wealthy could afford private couriers, everyone else relied on slower, less reliable channels. This divide wasn't just logistical, it reinforced social hierarchies, ensuring elites maintained control over information flows. Sound familiar? It's the same dynamic playing out in our digital age, where internet access isn't just a utility but a determinant of economic and political power. Yet Rome's greatest legacy might be its cautionary tale about fragility. For all its sophistication, the empire's network collapsed when political will and maintenance faltered. Roads crumbled, signal towers went dark, and knowledge became fragmented. Our internet, for all its redundancy, faces similar vulnerabilities, not from Gothic invasions but from cyber attacks, corporate monopolies, or even solar storms. The Romans remind us that no system, no matter how advanced, is immune to entropy. Their ruins whisper a warning: connectivity isn't a given, it's a choice societies must actively sustain. What ultimately connects Rome's world to ours isn't the technology itself, but the human stories behind it. A Roman soldier scribbling a letter home on a wax tablet and a teenager sending a text message across continents are driven by the same impulse to reach beyond isolation, to touch another mind. The mediums evolve, but the yearning remains. 2 millennia from now, when our fiber optic cables lie buried like Roman roads, future civilizations might marvel not at the wires we laid, but at the unbroken thread of human longing they carried. The ceaseless, beautiful drive to say, across time and space, I am here. Are you listening? Some historians and enthusiasts stretch the comparison between Rome's communication networks and the modern internet to hyperbolic extremes, claiming the empire essentially invented an ancient internet. But before we picture toga-clad senators scrolling through marble tablets, let's separate fact from fiction. Rome's system was groundbreaking for its time, but equating it to the digital revolution requires ignoring critical distinctions. Start with the myth of universal access. Unlike today's internet, where anyone with a smartphone can participate, Rome's networks were hierarchical by design. The Cursus Publicus wasn't an open platform. It was an elite tool reserved for state business, military orders, and imperial decrees. Private citizens relied on patchwork alternatives, merchant caravans, traveling friends, or expensive hired couriers with no guarantee of delivery. Imagine if only government emails could use fiber optic cables while everyone else depended on unreliable snail mail. That's closer to the reality Romans faced. Another oversimplification centers on speed. Sure, official dispatches could traverse the empire in weeks, an astonishing feat for antiquity, but this wasn't instantaneous communication. Urgent military alerts might leap from signal towers at the speed of fire, but routine messages moved at the pace of hooves and sails. A merchant in Alexandria wouldn't receive daily market updates from Spain. He'd work with months-old data, adjusting prices based on rumors rather than real-time trends. The gap between Rome's fastest and slowest information channels was vast, unlike our expectation of near-uniform latency online. Then there's the myth of decentralization. While the internet thrives on distributed nodes that reroute data flexibly, Rome's system hinged on rigid central control. Roads, couriers, and archives all served the imperial machine, with provincial hubs replicating Rome's dictates rather than generating local content. If a governor in Britannia innovated a better tax process, adoption required slow, top-down approval. No viral spread like open-source software today. Even the Acta Diurna, often called Rome's social media, was curated by state-appointed editors, not a free forum for public discourse. The most persistent exaggeration involves scalability. Modern networks handle billions of simultaneous interactions, emails, streams, transactions without breaking. Rome's infrastructure, impressive as it was, couldn't remotely match that volume. A single imperial courier might carry dozens of scrolls, but each required manual writing, sealing, and transport. Scaling up meant breeding more horses or training more scribes, not spinning up virtual servers. During crises like the Year of the Four Emperors, the system choked under conflicting orders, proving how fragile centralization could be. None of this diminishes Rome's achievements. Their networks were masterpieces of pre-industrial engineering, binding continents through sheer organizational will, but calling it an internet obscures more than it reveals. The better analogy: Rome built the first continent-wide postal service fused with a proto-telegraph, a system brilliant for its time, yet bound by the physics of muscle, ink, and stone. The takeaway isn't that Romans failed to invent the internet, but that they solved similar problems with radically different tools. Their genius lay in maximizing what they had: roads instead of routers, wax tablets instead of Wi-Fi. In an age before electricity, they made 3 continents feel interconnected, and that perhaps is more impressive than any anachronistic comparison. The real wonder isn't how much their world resembled ours, but how much they accomplished without any of our technological shortcuts. So did the Romans invent the internet? Not exactly, but they cracked the code on something far more profound: the universal human need to connect. 2,000 years apart, both civilizations faced the same challenge: how to shrink vast distances into something manageable, how to make information flow faster than feet or horses or ships could carry it. The solutions looked different: chariots versus fiber optics, wax tablets versus touchscreens, but the impulses behind them are eerily identical. Think about how both systems transformed power. Rome's roads and couriers didn't just move messages, they redefined what an empire could be. Suddenly, a city on the Tiber could govern deserts in Egypt and forests in Germany because knowledge traveled faster than rebellion could spread. Sound familiar? Today's internet lets corporations and governments operate across continents in real time, reshaping global power dynamics just as radically. The tools evolve, but the equation remains: control the flow of information, and you control the world. The parallels even extend to our struggles. Rome grappled with misinformation when merchants inflated grain prices with fake barbarian invasion rumors, a first-century version of viral disinformation. Their solution: imperial fact-checkers stationed at major ports, auditing both cargo and gossip. Today's content moderation battles feel like déjà vu, just scaled to billions of users. And when Roman engineers built redundancy into their roads, alternate routes around landslides, they were solving the same problem cloud computing addresses now: how to keep the network alive when pieces fail. Yet here's the twist: Rome's system collapsed not because it was primitive, but because maintaining it required relentless investment. Roads crumbled without repair crews, signal towers fell dark without trained operators, and once the political will faded, so did the connections. That's the real warning echoing across millennia. Our internet feels eternal, but like Rome's networks, it's fragile, a web of cables, satellites, and trust that demands constant upkeep. The most humbling realization: we're still using their blueprint. Latin standardized the empire's documents much like HTML structures our web pages. Roman merchants tracking shipments on wax tablets weren't so different from our supply chain apps. Even the tabularii, those private couriers who became Rome's gig economy, mirror today's delivery drivers scrolling through optimized routes on their phones. The technology dazzles, but the patterns repeat. Maybe the internet isn't revolutionary because it's new, but because it finally fulfills an ancient dream: to erase distance entirely. When you hit send on a message to someone halfway across the planet, you're participating in a ritual older than the Colosseum. The Romans would have killed for our speed, but they'd recognize the purpose instantly: To whisper across mountains, to shout across seas, to say in 1,000 different ways, I am here and so are you. That's the real lesson here. Human progress isn't about inventing needs, it's about inventing better ways to meet the ones we've always had. So the next time your video buffers or your email pings, take a second to marvel. You're not just using technology, you're continuing a conversation that began long before the first keystroke, on roads paved by people who understood, just as we do, that connection isn't a luxury, it's the very fabric of civilization. What other ancient tech surprises you? Could the Phoenicians have had their own version of GPS with star navigation? Did medieval monks invent cloud storage with their scriptoria? Drop your theories below, and if you loved unraveling this historical mystery with us, hit subscribe, because the past isn't just prologue, it's packed with puzzles waiting to be solved.